You're listening to The Signal Daily.
Hello, I'm Manaswini, your host for The Signal Daily podcast. This is the episode for 24th May 2024. For the first story, we are talking about managers struggling with the Gen Z workforce. What seems to be the problem? Well, listen in to find out. And in our second segment, we dive into the realities of the $100 billion climate pledge that required richer nations to mobilize funding to climate initiatives in LMIC countries. How much of that has actually been fruitful? Stay tuned till the end to know more. Managers today are really feeling the generational strain as more Gen Z pour into offices. With Gen Z, those born after 1997, now making up a bigger chunk of the workforce, some vastly different ideas around work are creating a messy collision. In fact, according to a 2023 survey cited in the New York Post, out of 1,300 managers in the US, 3 out of 4 agreed that Gen Z employees are harder to deal with at work than employees from other generations. The survey also showed that nearly 2/3 of employers said they have to fire Gen Zers more often than not. But why is that the case? Well, the basic rules of professionalism are now getting tossed out of the window. Take something as simple as showing up for meetings on time. Managers are having to constantly reprimand young Gen Z employees for just not seeming to care about punctuality. For example, at Japanese tire company Yokohama's Mumbai office, a senior executive was furious when 3 younger team members missed an important weekly meeting due to oversleeping after a weekend trip. Initially angry, the boss later wondered what can be the solution to this problem. Then the company reportedly realized it needs to hear from its younger workers. So Yokohama started a new program called HR Aapke Dwar or HR at your door, where HR can say what new policies should be introduced, what current ones should remain, and what needs to be paused. And that's not all. With so much virtual work now, managers are also dealing with Gen Zers who perhaps didn't get the memo about looking presentable on video calls. They just don their hoodies, pajamas, and gym clothes. I'm sure you must have even come across multiple such reels on Instagram. For instance, as highlighted in the Mint report, most banks have a strict formal dress code and train new graduates on how to present themselves because customers expect to see bank staff looking sharp. But younger employees aren't so keen on this and often tell their managers that the dress code is too old-fashioned. This casual attitude towards dressing is becoming common even in smaller towns for that matter. And then there are tech distractions. While Gen Z grew up as digital natives, they can't seem to tear themselves away from their phones during meetings. So managers are constantly having to politely call out Gen Zers who are clearly zoning out, more focused on texting or scrolling than the discussion happening right there. There also seems to be a big philosophical gap around workplace hierarchies. Past generations believed showing deference to senior leadership and being humble. However, Gen Z comes with the attitude of freely challenging decisions from bosses and pushing back on assignments. Which begs the question, will the next few years be about creating a new standard or will we see a complete breakdown of professional norms? I guess only time will tell. But while businesses are trying to figure out Gen Z, they are also going to have to get ready for Gen Alpha soon, the kids born after 2010s. And from what it looks like, kids from this generation are total non-conformists who were basically born with iPads in their hands. So Indian businesses better buckle up because keeping up with this free-spirited tech-savvy generation is going to be one hell of a ride. For our second segment, we are going to bring you deep dives on stories from the world of technology, business, policy, and anything that leaves you with food for thought. If you're a listener from North India, I'm sure you can feel the terrible heat as much as me. Delhi temperatures are hovering around 45 degrees Celsius. Rajasthan's Barmer region crossed the 48 degrees Celsius mark, which is the highest so far. You must have also read the news that Bollywood superstar Shah Rukh Khan was hospitalized due to heat stroke. I mean, it's a furnace outdoors. Meanwhile, down south, parts of Kerala are witnessing torrential rains. 5 districts have been put on red alert and 4 lives have been lost due to heavy downpours. If this kind of extremity is not a sign of climate change, then I don't know what is. But this brings me to today's story, climate equity. Although the climate change crisis is being felt across the world, the impact of the situation is being felt differently in different countries and on different population groups, with the poorest countries being impacted disproportionately. Let me explain. According to Oxfam, the poorest half of the world's population, which accounts for roughly 3.5 billion people, is responsible for just 10% of carbon emission. But they end up facing the worst effects of climate change. Think about the 2022 Pakistan floods, for instance. On the other hand, according to a New York Times article, rich countries, including the US, Canada, Japan, and most of Western Europe, account for just 12% of world's population today, but are responsible for 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions over the past 170 years. So that's essentially the disproportionality that I was talking about. Now, keeping this in mind, at COP15 in 2009, richer countries pledged to mobilize $100 billion a year in quote-unquote climate finance to support LMIC nations address their climate needs. This pledge was reaffirmed in the Paris Climate Accord as well. However, there's only a vague confirmation from OECD on the climate goal being fulfilled in 2023 through direct contribution from country to country along with multilateral funding from development banks and climate funds. Firstly, if that's true, the pledge was fulfilled a good 2 years after the deadline. Secondly, the focus has been on how much money has gone into it, not too much on mapping the actual impact. But most importantly, believe it or not, a recent investigative report by Reuters also found that the richer countries are managing to squeeze profits out of this climate pledge. So, a review of the UN and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development revealed a few concerning issues. It shows that wealthy nations have given out climate aid-related loans of about $18 billion at market rate interest. That includes $10.2 billion in loans by Japan, $3.6 billion by France, $1.9 billion by Germany, and $1.5 billion by the United States. Now, this is unusual because climate loans are not ideally supposed to be given out at competitive market rates. It's supposed to be at little to no interest. Another $11 billion, which was mostly loaned out by Japan along with $10.6 billion in grants from the EU, came with specific terms and conditions that required the recipient country to hire companies, non-profits, or public agencies from the donor countries. Now, this is concerning because the $100 billion climate pledge is not about profiteering at all. It's about addressing the imbalance, social injustice, and climate inequity. But far from mitigating climate challenges, what this kind of loaning is doing is creating a debt cycle in nations that are already burdened with debts. It's a vicious cycle and it hampers the ability to invest in climate solutions or even for that matter spend on welfare schemes. And if you look at where the money is going, a 2023 Reuters analysis suggests that at least $3 billion of climate financing went to random projects unrelated to climate initiatives. Think of projects like a coal plant in Bangladesh that was financed by Japan, an airport expansion project in Egypt, a goddamn gelato and chocolate store expansion project funded by Italy, and the US loaning money for a hotel in Haiti. I mean, how is this supposed to help LMIC countries address this climate change crisis exactly? But all climate summits, all discussions on climate solutions at global levels always end up in a deadlock at exactly this point. Who should take the responsibility? While smaller developing nations feel the onus is on the richer countries because of the disproportionality factor and historic emissions, wealthier economies argue otherwise. In fact, in response to why they are doling out loans at market rate interest, a US State Department spokesperson said that the Paris Climate Accord doesn't mention anything about making amends. But what's clear is that this definitely doesn't bode well for the future of climate change. If you like listening to The Signal Daily, please show us some support. Rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We'd love to hear what you have to say about this podcast. So feel free to shoot an email at hello@thesignal.co. The episode was researched, written and produced by Shorbury and me, Manaswini. Edited by Dinesh Narayanan. Mastered and mixed by Yash Hirve. You can catch this podcast every morning on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Prime Music or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are thesignal.co on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter.